Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech idea. Today I'm featuring Magda, Brazen Outlaw. She's a 2 mana 2/1 which says other dwarfs you control get +1/+0. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token, and she also has an activated ability that says sacrifice 5 treasures. And if you do, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Magda is a very powerful tutor commander, which we want to bring out early, accumulate a bunch of treasures, and then use her activated ability at the right time. When it comes to dragons, we want to tutor cards like Ancient Copper Dragon, a 6 mana 6/5 flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. If you are lucky and you hit 5 or above, you just got yourself another Magda activation, which you can use at any time. Goldspan Dragon, a 5 mana 4/4 flying haste, and whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Furthermore, treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. Which is great because in some cases we do not even have to tutor for Goldspan Dragon, we can just curve it out this way and get a huge mana advantage with it. Cavern Horde Dragon, a 9 mana 6/6, and this spell costs X less to cast where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. It has Flying, Trample and Haste, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. Another powerful synergy piece just as Ancient Copper Dragon, so you can see in which direction these dragons are going. Hellkite Tyrant, a 6 mana 6/5 flying trample, and when it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. If you ain't winning by completely dominating the board with your dragon army, this is another great alternative win con. Gisgoria, a 9 mana 5/4 with affinity for artifacts and flying and haste, and when it attacks, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast an artifact spell from among them this turn. If you do, it has affinity for artifacts. As you remember, Magda cannot only tutor for dragon cards, she can also tutor for artifact cards, so there are also a bunch of powerful ones in this deck. Steel Hellkite, a 6 mana 5/5 with flying. It has an activated ability, so it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for 2 mana. And another activated ability for X, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate only once each turn. Ending this section with an artifact creature is a great transition to the powerful artifacts that we want to cheat out. For example, Portal to Phyrexia, a 9 mana artifact, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. Roaming Throne, a 4 mana 4/4 with War 2, and as it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type. Most likely we will choose Dwarf, and Roaming Throne is the chosen type in addition to its other types. If a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. Roaming Throne definitely accelerates your game plan when it comes to creating treasures, as it will trigger Magda twice as soon as a dwarf becomes tapped. The Reaver Cleaver, a 3 mana legendary artifact, and equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, create that many treasure tokens. You can also tutor for the One Ring, a 4 mana legendary artifact which is indestructible, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring, and you can tap it to put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring. Sky Sovereign, Console Flagship, a 5 mana 6/5 flying, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. You can crew it for total power 3 or more, and the crew mechanic is also very powerful in this deck, as in many cases a 2/1 won't survive an attack, but you have to tap your dwarves in some way. So using them to crew vehicles is a very powerful synergy. God Pharaoh's Statue, a 6 mana legendary artifact, and spells your opponent casts cost 2 more to cast. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 1 life. It's not the most powerful artifact, but it will definitely slow your opponents down. Our dwarves have to become tapped to trigger Magda's ability, so let's do so. Axe-God Cavalry, a 2 mana 2/2, and we can tap it so target creature gains haste until end of turn. It's not only a great haste enabler, but it is also a dwarf, which needs to become tapped for its activated ability, so you profit in a lot of different ways. Vault Robber, a 2 mana 1/3, you can pay 1 mana, tap it, and exile a creature card from your graveyard to create a treasure token. Gloin, Dwarf Emissary, a 3 mana 3/3, and whenever you cast a historic spell, create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. You can also tap him and sacrifice a treasure to goad target creature. Smuggler's Copter, a 2 mana 3/3 with flying, and when it attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Springleaf Drum, a 1 mana artifact, you can tap it and tap an untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. Paradise Mantle, a 0 mana artifact equipment, and equipped creature has tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Let's keep accelerating our mana advantage. We play Zorn, a 3 mana 3/2, and if you would create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. Professional Facebreaker, a 3 mana 2/3 with Menace, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. In the worst case, we can also sacrifice a treasure to exile the top card of our library, and we may play that card this turn. Crime Novelist, a 3 mana 1/3, and whenever we sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on Crime Novelist and add 1 red mana. You want to win more? You get it. Dockside Extortionist, a 2 mana 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. Academy Manufacturer, a 3 mana 1/3, and if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. Of course, we are mostly focused on treasure tokens, but having some more backup artifacts like clues and foods can be very helpful. Last but not least, we play Tanglewire, a 3 mana artifact with fading. So it comes into play with 4 fading counters, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we remove a fade counter from it. If we can't, we sacrifice it. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player taps an untapped artifact, creature or land he or she controls for each fade counter on Tanglewire. This will not only slow our opponents down, but we will just keep tapping our dwarfs to this ability to create even more treasures. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I would play in Magda Brazen Outlaw. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I should feature next, and then I would say see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.